The year was 1893. The Chicago World's Fair was drawing millions of spectators eager to witness the dawn of a new century. Electricity, moving walkways, and towering machinery promised a future without limits. But in a small, crowded exhibition hall, a man named Whitcomb Judson was about to present his own vision of the future. He called it the clasp locker. It was meant to replace the agonizingly slow process of buttoning high-laced shoes. The crowd gathered. The demonstration began. And almost immediately, the device jammed. It caught fabric. It pinched skin. The spectators laughed. Judson walked away humiliated. He would die without ever seeing his invention succeed. But his humiliation was only the beginning of a 40-year war. A war to perfect one tiny, infuriating object. The zipper. A device so simple it looks obvious today. But its creation ruined careers, shattered reputations, and defied the limits of microscopic engineering. This was not a single eureka moment. It was a relentless, painful grind. And to understand why it took 4 decades to master, you have to look at what humanity used before the zipper existed. For thousands of years, the fundamental technology of keeping clothes on your body did not change. From the frozen tundras of the Stone Age to the courts of medieval Europe, humanity relied on the exact same tools. Bone toggles, wooden pegs, metal brooches, and eventually the button. The ancient Romans used fibulae, which were essentially giant safety pins, to hold their togas together. They worked, but they were rudimentary. They required 2 hands, precise alignment, and constant maintenance. As clothing became more tailored and complex, the buttonhole emerged in 13th century Europe. It was a massive leap forward. Suddenly, garments could fit snugly against the body. But the button had a fatal flaw. It was agonizingly slow. Imagine living in the 1800s. You are wearing a heavy winter coat. It has 20 small buttons. The wind is howling. Your fingers are numb. You have to align each button with its corresponding hole, pushing it through layers of thick wool. It could take 5 minutes just to get dressed. The wealthy had servants to do this for them. The wealthy even used buttons as a pure status symbol. King Francis I of France reportedly ordered a black velvet coat decorated with 13,600 gold buttons. It was less a piece of clothing and more a walking bank vault. But for the average person, buttons were a daily test of patience. The Industrial Revolution in the 19th century changed everything. Textile mills could weave fabric faster than ever before. Sewing machines could stitch a shirt in minutes. But the bottleneck remained the closure. Women sat in sweatshops for hours, painstakingly hand-sewing hundreds of buttonholes by hand. The fabric was ready. The manufacturing was ready. But the fastener was stuck in the Stone Age. Engineers knew there had to be a mechanical way to close a seam. They just could not figure out the geometry. The textile industry in the mid-1800s was a massive, churning empire. And at the center of it was Elias Howe. You might not know his name, but you know his invention. Howe patented the first practical sewing machine in 1846. It was an invention that would change the world, but it brought him nothing but misery. He spent years in brutal patent wars, fighting off imitators who stole his design. He was sick, bankrupt, and ignored. The legal battles consumed his life. But in 1851, right in the middle of his desperate fight for recognition, Howe filed another patent. He called it the automatic continuous clothing closure. It was a brilliant concept, a series of metal clasps mounted on a fabric tape, designed to slide together and lock into place. It was the conceptual ancestor of the zipper. Howe had identified the exact problem. Buttons were discrete, separate units. If you could link them together and move them with a single sliding motion, you could close a garment in 1 second. But Elias Howe was drowning in litigation. He was spending every waking moment fighting for the sewing machine, the invention that actually mattered to him. He never manufactured the continuous clothing closure. He never even made a working model. He filed the patent, locked it away in a drawer, and went back to court. That decision seemed small at the time. It was not. Howe would die in 1867, exhausted and wealthy, but completely unaware that he had just buried one of the most important inventions of the 19th century. The textile empire continued to expand, churning out miles of fabric, all held together by millions of slow, hand-sewn buttons. The world needed the zipper, but the man who invented the sewing machine was too broken to give it to them. 40 years later, the burden of the button fell on the shoulders of a man named Whitcomb Judson. Judson was not an engineer. He was an inventor, a salesman, and an eccentric dreamer. He lived in Chicago, a city rebuilt from the ashes of the Great Fire, obsessed with modernity and mechanical solutions. Judson hated buttons. Specifically, he hated lacing up high-button shoes. In the late 19th century, fashionable shoes required a hook and dozens of eyelets. It was tedious. It was frustrating. So Judson decided to fix it. He designed his own mechanical closure. He called it the clasp locker. Unlike Howe's design, Judson's was a complex system of metal hooks and eyes attached to a leather strip. A metal sliding key was supposed to pull the hooks through the eyes, locking them together. It was an ambitious idea, but it was fundamentally flawed. The hooks were too exposed. They bent easily. They caught on lining fabric. But Judson was a salesman. He believed he could sell ice to Eskimos. In 1893, he secured a spot at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. This was the greatest stage in the world. Millions of people were coming to see the future. Judson saw it as his moment. He stood in his booth, surrounded by mechanical wonders, and pitched his clasp locker. He demonstrated it on a pair of shoes, and it failed. The mechanism jammed. The crowd laughed. They called it a gimmick, a toy, a solution looking for a problem. Undeterred, Judson founded the Universal Fastener Company. He convinced investors to pour money into his dream. But the orders never came. In the entire history of the company, they sold exactly 20 clasp lockers. 20. The manufacturing process was too expensive. The device was too unreliable. Judson had poured his reputation, his money, and his life into the clasp locker. He had crossed the ocean of invention, only to drown in the shallows of execution. The failure of the clasp locker was not just a technical setback. It was a cultural rejection. The Victorian era was a time of rigid social morals. Clothing was armor. Layers of heavy fabric, tightly laced corsets, and high collars were designed to protect modesty. The idea of a garment that could be opened instantly, with a single pull of a metal slider, was deeply unsettling to conservative society. There was a genuine superstition surrounding mechanical closures. People feared they would fail in public, leaving the wearer exposed and humiliated. A jammed button was an inconvenience. A jammed zipper was a trap. You could be stuck inside your own clothes, requiring scissors to escape. Tailors hated the device. It threatened their livelihood. If you did not need to spend hours hand-sewing buttonholes, you did not need to pay a master tailor for 3 hours of labor. The fastener was viewed as dangerous to the craft. And then there was the morality argument. Religious leaders and conservative commentators suggested that a fast, easy-to-open garment would lead to moral decay. It was a subtle, unspoken fear that mechanical closures made undressing too tempting, too fast, too easy. The world was not ready for a device that removed friction from the act of getting dressed. The Universal Fastener Company was dying. They changed their name, trying to escape the stigma of failure. They moved operations to New Jersey. They tried selling the clasp locker for postal bags. No one wanted it. They tried it for money belts. No one wanted it. For years, the only successful application for Judson's invention was a small pouch holding pipe tobacco. A revolutionary fastening device reduced to holding chewing tobacco. It was an absurd humiliation. The world had looked at the zipper, and the world had said no. And it is here that the history gets dark. Whitcomb Judson died in 1909. He was 50 years old. He died believing his life's work was a complete and utter failure. His company was on life support. The investors were furious. The product was a joke. But the board of directors, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, made one final move. They hired a young Swedish-American electrical engineer named Gideon Sundback. Sundback had no background in textiles. He was an electrical engineer, but he was meticulous, obsessive, and completely immune to the conventional wisdom that the mechanical closure was impossible. He looked at Judson's design and immediately saw the problem. The hooks were too large. The spacing was inconsistent. It relied on a hook-and-eye system, which was inherently unstable. Sundback threw everything out. He decided to invent something entirely new. He worked obsessively, sometimes 18 hours a day. He melted down metal. He redesigned the stamping machines. He realized that the closure needed to be a continuous chain of interlocking teeth. Not hooks. Teeth. He designed a tiny metal scoop, identical on both sides, that would lock into a corresponding slit. The Y-shaped slider would force the two rows of teeth together, aligning them perfectly before clamping them shut. It was a masterpiece of micro-engineering. He filed the patent in 1917. But here is the part that should make you angry. The board of directors still did not care. They were tired of pouring money into fasteners. They fired Sundback. They stripped him of his control. They sat on the patent. They let the engineering sit in a drawer. The man who solved the 40-year puzzle was pushed aside by the very company he saved. If you are finding this story interesting, subscribe to the channel. Here at Common Law, we tell stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The rescue of the zipper came not from the fashion industry, but from the military. The First World War was a meat grinder of industrial proportions. Soldiers were fighting in trenches, exposed to gas attacks, freezing mud, and shrapnel. They needed gear that could be sealed instantly. A pilot flying an open cockpit biplane at 10,000 feet could not fumble with dozens of buttons on his flight suit. His fingers would be numb. The wind would be howling. If he could not close his suit in seconds, he would freeze to death. The US military quietly bought the rights to Sundback's fastener. They put it on flight suits. They put it on sleeping bags. They put it on money belts for sailors. The zipper had found its first real market, not as a fashion statement, but as a tool for survival. When the war ended, the military contracts dried up. But the veterans came home, and they brought the knowledge of the fastener with them. And here is the part that surprises people. The word zipper did not exist yet. The device was still called a separable fastener. In 1923, the B.F. Goodrich Company decided to put the fastener on a new line of rubber galoshes. An executive at Goodrich, looking at the way the slider moved and the sound it made, said it went zip. Zipper. It was a marketing gimmick for boots, nothing more. But the name stuck. The Goodrich boots sold incredibly well. People loved the sound. They loved the speed. The zipper had finally escaped the drawer. The clock was already running on a global revolution. The transition from rubber boots to high fashion took another decade. It required a massive cultural shift. In the 1930s, the avant-garde designer Elsa Schiaparelli boldly featured exposed, oversized plastic zippers in her couture dresses. Suddenly, the zipper was chic. It was modern. It was daring. Then, in 1937, the zipper achieved its final victory. It beat the button in the Battle of the Fly. French tailors began putting zippers in men's trousers. Esquire magazine declared the zipper the newest tailoring idea for men. The Victorian moral panic was gone, replaced by the relentless convenience of the 20th century. Today, the scale of the zipper is staggering. The world produces over 14 billion zippers every year. That is enough to wrap around the equator dozens of times. The Japanese company YKK alone manufactures half of all zippers on Earth. They do it by mining their own brass, manufacturing their own machines, and weaving their own thread, creating an almost entirely self-sufficient empire of fastening. They produce zippers at a rate that defies human comprehension, stamping out microscopic teeth with flawless precision. And here is the part that catches people off guard. Zippers are not just in your jeans, they are in spacesuits. NASA relies on specialized heavy-duty zippers to keep astronauts alive in the vacuum of space. Airtight, pressure-sealed zippers hold the suit together. If the zipper fails, the astronaut dies. They are in hazmat suits. They are in scuba gear. They are in waterproof tents designed for Antarctic expeditions. The device that was mocked in Chicago is now the only thing standing between a human being and the vacuum of space. Think about that for a second. Go back to Chicago, 1893. Whitcomb Judson, standing in a crowded hall, watching people laugh at his jammed metal clasps. He died thinking he was a failure. Elias Howe died exhausted, never knowing his discarded 1851 patent was a prophecy. Gideon Sundback solved the engineering, only to be fired and forgotten by the men who hired him. 3 men. 40 years of failure, mockery, and ruined careers. They fought a war against the button, against tailors, against Victorian morality, and against their own investors. To create an object you use without thinking. You use it every morning. You are probably wearing one right now. You pull it up without looking. You pull it down without thinking. The zipper is a silent monument to persistence. It was ignored. It was mocked. It trapped people in their own clothes. But it was perfected. It went from the bottom of a pipe tobacco pouch to the surface of the moon. It holds the world together, one tiny metal tooth at a time. If this story surprised you, subscribe to Common Lore and tell us in the comments which part of the zipper's history surprised you the most, and leave your like so more people can find this video.